So Advance Wars is a turn-based strategy game.
Kind of similar to chess, where it's my turn, I make my moves, it's your turn, you make your moves, and we go back and forth.
But it's kind of like chess on steroids in a lot of ways. You can move every unit that you have on the board all at once in one turn, unlike in chess where you're moving just one at a time.
In the early game, you start building cheaper units and build up your economy by capturing buildings. This in turn gives you the income to build more expensive units and also move closer towards the enemy meanwhile. So at some point you will then inevitably start clashing against each other in a fight for resources. Until one player gets the win condition. The classical ones are to win by capturing the opponent's HQ. And the other one is to rout their army, so defeating every single unit they have on board.
So in addition to having the different types of units, you also have custom maps, which is basically the board that the game is played on. So the maps have different tiles, terrain tiles that affect how units attack and defend, that affect how they move around, and the maps change basically every game that you play. You can play on a different map. And so that adds a lot of complexity and individuality to the games. You also have what are called commanding officers, or COs, and they're basically like a character that's not on the board, but it gives your units different abilities and different powers depending on that CO's characteristics, their unique traits.
Okay, that was a lot to take in, but suffice to say that Advance Wars is very, very complicated. So how does a game like this survive? After all, the Game Boy Advance was a handheld console where the only way to play against another person was to either hand them your Game Boy or connect two Game Boys together with a link cable. Well, the answer back in 2004 was the internet, and the one person who decided to create what would become today the place to play Advance Wars by Web. It's a website designed by a college student for a school project that is still being used today.
But before we get into that, a word from today's sponsor. For those of you who find meal prep difficult and can't decide what to eat, HelloFresh makes mealtime easy with a variety of recipes each week to choose from that best fits your lifestyle, ranging from calorie-smart dishes to quick meals. Whether you're grinding ranked on Valorant or just rolling in Genshin, HelloFresh helps save you time so you can do more of what you love by cutting out the grocery store. Once you set up a custom delivery date that fits your schedule, each week you'll get sent a fresh box of all the ingredients you need to make perfectly portioned meals. And of course, pause or cancel the subscription at any time. One of the dishes we were excited to try was the minestrone-inspired tortellini soup, which we made in under 20 minutes and was as delicious as it was easy to make. If HelloFresh sounds like the service for you, use the code HFAction to support our channel and get 20 meals for free when you sign up. Link is in the description below.
So basically, there's a few key figures in the early history of the game's development, and the primary one is A Mariner. And his name is still in the URL for the site. He coded almost the entire initial version of the site. He has paid for the server from literally the site's inception through today. All at his own expense. He's never made a single cent from Advance Wars by Web. Has faithfully kept the site up for almost 2 decades, which is incredible. You don't find that really online anywhere anymore, much less in a relatively small community like Advance Wars. The site launched in December 2004, so it's older than a lot of the popular internet companies that these days. We're older than Facebook, older than Amazon. So it's a really old site.
Despite its relative age, it's a pretty robust website. Back in the day, it featured forums, a fully emulated board, and even matchmaking capabilities. It was one of the most efficient ways to connect to other Advance Wars fans and start playing immediately.
So in 2003, the very first iteration of Advance Wars by Web actually started off kind of as a play-by-email format. So you'd pass an image of your turn through email, and then your friend would update their game state, send you the image back, and that was the first iteration. It was Advance Wars by email. He was a programming student, so he was just out of college or finishing college at the time and had some basic knowledge of programming. And so for his first basically real programming project, he made an online version of what they were already kind of doing through email. So you could log into the website and you could join the game, take your turn. The page would refresh every time you moved a unit. So it was really slow and inconvenient, especially by today's standards. But that was the first iteration of Advance Wars by Web.
Traditionally, Advance Wars by Web games are not played in one sitting, but it's more closer to correspondence chess, where you have a number of days per turn. And as a result of this, the top players actually never faced each other that often. So maybe like 10 times over the course of 2 years or so back at the time. And there's always a lot of pressure on the line because the result of one match can mean a lot. It's like one tournament per year and single elimination, things like this. Yeah, this made for very fun situations because there was one tournament which I eventually ended up winning, but the tournament took 3 years or so because a single match took around a year until it was finished.
So why did turns take so long? Couldn't you just move your pieces in a couple of minutes and be done with it? Well, it's not that simple. The game, especially in the mid to late game, can become so complex that you need to manually calculate every single move. There are even custom tools built into the website that help you figure out the best course of action.
So there's a very simple thing like a damage calculator, which you can enter in 2 different units and enter in their health and their firepower bonuses and all that kind of stuff. And I'll just tell you what your damage range is going to be. And then the really big tool that you can invest tons and tons of time into is called the Move Planner. And it kind of just sets up a separate board that you can manipulate however you want, and you can run through all the scenarios that you might go through to take your turn. And that's where you really invest hours and hours and hours.
With games taking so long, it's a wonder that the community is still around today. But despite turns taking literal weeks to months, the game is actually pretty low commitment, if you can believe it.
And this is something that I found very appealing, is that you can just kind of take your turn very, very flexibly around your schedule. So like during a lunch break is when I'd usually take my turn when I was first climbing on my phone, because it's hosted on the website, and all of the there's no downloads or anything. It's all hosted and computed and everything on the website. So pretty much any device can play the game, which is really handy.
During the mid-2000s and into the 2010s, the game had a fairly steady fanbase, and the game was kept fresh by a dedicated team of map makers. With the mechanics of the game being more or less set in stone, one of the few variables in each game is the map and terrain. The presence of mountains versus plains versus snow will drastically alter your strategy and playstyle, and being able to master your surroundings is critical to winning in Advance Wars.
The competitive scene is tightly related to the maps that are used in Advance Wars. They're integrally linked in what essentially amounts to a feedback loop. So the meta is partially driven by the type of maps that are made. The maps then that are made afterwards are influenced by the meta, which then influences the maps. And there's, let's call it basic terrain. So you have plains, forests, mountains, rivers, sea tiles, and those all affect the movement and defense of the units as they traverse across the map. So when you're designing a map, it's almost like, you can think of it almost as like a early game, mid game, late game sort of dichotomy. And so typically you'll have 2 sides separated on either side of the map, kind of like in a starting position in a chessboard, right? And so you have a lot of early properties that are close by to those bases that you can then capture early. So on a map, what you're really looking for is, just from a gameplay design point of view, you want to have variety so that, there's different capture phases that you can pick. It's not just like one line of cities, and obviously the infantry is going to capture the same cities in the same order every game. So you want to give players options to diversify what order they capture things in, what units are possible to be built and are viable.
All of the maps are community made. There's different members in the community who have made lots of maps, and they get put into the map committee, and they are in charge of rotating out different maps for the competitive scene, and also picking which ones go in there and editing ones that need to be edited and all of that stuff. So that everything is community run. There isn't, I guess there's no voice from on high or like anything like that. Yeah.
In the 2010s, the game began to die down a little bit. The website's age was beginning to show, and playing Advance Wars by Web could be more frustrating than fun.
you had to refresh the page every time you took an action. So you would click a unit, it would refresh the page and pop up with tiles highlighted where you could move the unit. You would click what tile you wanted, it would refresh the page, and then it would pop up with which options you had for that unit. So if you wanted to attack, then you would hit fire, it would refresh the page and give you your targets, you would click the target, it took a long time to take moves, and it was very click intensive as a result. Like, there was a lot of waiting involved. And it's a good thing that turn-based strategy fans are patient people in general. So a lot of people would put up with it. I think it was late 2016 or so. And one of the moderators who I had known before and was still around contacted me and was like, hey, we have this Discord server. I know you haven't been around in a while, but if you're still interested in Advanced Wars by Web, come check it out, just hang out. No obligation to stay or do anything, but it'd be cool to see you again, sort of thing. But then in 2017, it was June 2017, that's when I came back and joined the Discord server and found that we still have a community, which is really cool. And it was right around the same time I got developer permissions from through Glenstorm from talking with him, and a Mariner signed off on it because I'd been around for a while and they trusted me. And honestly, there wasn't a lot to lose anyway, because worst case, I take a broken site and leave it broken. There wasn't much to lose. But I was able to restart development on Advanced Wars by Web in 2017, basically alone, with some help from Glenstorm. The Global League had been dead since the server change. A lot of the scripts that booted inactive players were broken and not working. So I cleaned up a lot of that stuff and restarted the Global League. But Matsuzen, it was kind of like the holy grail for Advanced Wars by Web. He made it a completely refreshless interface. Without having to refresh the page even one time, you could play an entire game theoretically between two people, and you could see your opponent's moves update in real time on your board as you're sitting there watching. Whereas in the past, it was very common if you were playing a live game against someone where you're both sitting down trying to play at the same time, you would, through the forum or a chat or something, you would send them a message that was like, hey, it's your turn, and they would refresh the page and send you a message when they finished, hey, it's your turn now. And you'd go back and forth like that, refreshing the page to see your opponent's moves. So having the refreshless interface just completely opened up, once again, it just made it way more accessible to people who had higher standards for what they're willing to accept from a game in terms of the patience and the time required to play. And it really made it easy for people to just spam games, spam live games. It just made everything a lot easier.
In 2021, something big happened.
The announcement that another game is coming out actually sparked a lot of the recent growth. So the tournaments I just mentioned, they were still hovering at 200 players maybe at that time.
We were right around 100-ish to 150 users, and I remember it started ticking up and we were like, wow, it's at 200 users, that's the highest we've ever had in the history of the site. And then it was 3 days later it's at 300. We're like, wow, we might actually hit 500. And then 3 days later it was at 500. We're like, oh, we might actually hit 1,000. And then the first wave, it topped out just at about 1,500 concurrent players. And that's versus the historical, never over 180 ever in the history of the site. It was just nuts.
A lot of, word of mouth just spread, in addition with new development on the site itself, most notably the refreshless interface, which is a massive improvement in user experience. This also led to more players stick around, and now we are at this 2,000 number in League, and probably even more that just play casually.
With a new influx of players came a huge wave of talent, and beginners started getting really good really quickly.
With the announcement of the reboot camp, I actually came in through a friend, completely unrelated to the reboot camp, but I was in the same surge of players. And it took me a month, and I was I became the top Fog player. Yeah, from never playing the game before. I've actually never played the originals either. So I'm looking forward to the reboot camp coming out, because I'll finally actually get to play the game.
With more players, the switch to a more standard esports format has been a long time coming. Few players have the time or patience to play a game that might last weeks to months, so a quote-unquote live format is becoming one of the more popular time controls.
For specific events, live play is much better. The time control in the game in the competitive scene is you start with 10 days on the clock, and every turn you take gives you another 2 days. But then the live play scene, you start with 5 minutes on the clock, and every turn gives you 2 more minutes.
If this sounds like a game you'd be interested in, now is the best possible time to get into it.
I have always been quite happy with how the Advance Wars community in general was. It has a good moderation team, especially nowadays. That's quite important in Discord, and it has always treated, let's say, the important topics seriously enough. So that makes it a very good community to be involved in, regardless on whether you want feedback for your own play or maybe for your maps or just to find players to play with. And nowadays in particular, there are a lot of out-of-site resources as well that you can use to either improve at the game or even just for entertainment.
You can also just hop onto the Discord. We're very welcoming there. There's people who kind of specialize in playing with new players and bringing them into the game.
At one point, it looked like the site was just going to be dead. Like, I remember talking with Voice of Akshon in 2011, and we were like, man, how cool would it be if you could have, like, at some point in the future, you could grow the site enough to have, you know, like 1,000 people in Global League. And it was like this pie in the sky, like, it could have just as easily said, what if we could, you know, learn to fly, sort of deal. And then here we were, and as it was happening, it was crazy, because, you know, we knew that the Reboot Camp announcement would drive a lot of interest to the site and to the community, but we had no idea the scale of what would happen.
As of 2023, the community hosted its first Legends Tournament Series and hosted the A Mariner Cup on New Year's Day. The previous record for most entrants in an AWBW tournament was 136 players. A Mariner Cup had 960. To say the game is alive and well would be selling it short.
Once again, thank you HelloFresh for sponsoring this video and offering our viewers 20 free meals when they sign up with the code HFAction.
This video is made possible thanks to our wonderful patrons. Massive thank you to everyone on this list, and shout out to B, Cloud, Kiaostick, Shampoo, Spartacus, and Yashichi for being Platinum supporters. And an extra special shout out to Marco and Steph for being our Diamond supporters. We hope you guys like this month's videos. If you want to talk to us, check out our Discord. If you want to support our channel and get info on unreleased videos, check out our Patreon. If you want to help us out in a different way, leaving a like, subscribing, and hitting the bell to stay up to date is also appreciated. My name is Jonah. Thanks for watching.